For most people in Western civilization at the end of the 19th century, things were looking good. The economy was improving as part of the Second Industrial Revolution, and there hadn't been a major war since the Napoleonic Wars almost a century ago. But in art and in the sciences, there was a level of anxiety growing, and today we'll explore that as we pursue modern art and modern science. Prior to the 20th century, science always had this firm belief in progress, that if you follow science and technology, things are going to get better and better. Isaac Newton, perhaps the most famous physicist, said a couple laws can explain everything. And many philosophers took that to mean that all of the world, all of the solar system, the whole universe, is just subject to a couple laws and can be explained in very simple principles. Auguste Comte is the father of positivism, and he believed that there was different stages. There was going to be a stage where things were explained by theology, and that there was going to be a stage after that where things are explained by philosophy, and the greatest age will be an age of scientific explanation, when humanity will be at its highest point. Karl Marx was a scientific socialist, and he believed in progress, that there's going to be different stages, and eventually we'll go from like feudalism to capitalism to socialism and to communism, where we'll be in some sort of paradise. So the idea was that if you follow science, you believe in progress, you'll be more confident, things will get better. The new science kind of undermines that. Albert Einstein comes up with this very famous theory of relativity, that time and space are all relative to the observer. So therefore, you don't have universal principles, but items that are more relative, and there's more things that are unknown. Even perhaps more unsettling is Max Planck and the advent of quantum mechanics. Then you can want to understand what it is at all, and I don't really understand what the theory of relativity it is, but suffice it to say that there's one principle of quantum mechanics, that you'll never know the velocity and position of an electron. There's a limit to human knowledge. Science can't give you all that knowledge. There's a level of uncertainty. Friedrich Nietzsche is a very profound philosopher and almost marks the beginning of the modern period in philosophy. Such a radical break from the past. And he says that reason, can stifle you. Your intellectual faculties can kill your emotions, your passions, your instinct. And he thinks this is a bad thing. Specifically, he thinks that Christianity and religion, this obedience that it fosters, kind of crushes you, kills the will. And so he says you need to do something to kind of restore the human and make it an Ubermensch, a superhuman person. The first thing is to deny that reason, deny that religion, empty yourself. Everything you've learned, kind of empty yourself. Then use your will, your power, to become independent, to go beyond even categories like good and evil, and create new ideas. And when you create the Ubermensch, the Superman, you'll be completely independent. So here's somebody who is talking about philosophy and willing to throw out everything that we've done in the last 2,000 years, since it's crushing to the human spirit. Then you have Sigmund Freud in psychoanalysis. And he says, what motivates people? We like to think our reason, right? Our conscious, rational choices motivate us. He says, no, it's our unconscious, irrational drives that drive us. And the psychoanalysis is to get to the bottom of those things driving us, in a variety of ways. So it's the id, our unconscious pleasure principle, which is lust and love and hate, that's driving us. We have our reason, our ego, that we can't actually just pursue everything, that society would be dead, we couldn't form anything. And our superego are the laws, the instructions that we have to follow. So it's a battle between these things. And he says it's those really repressed things. Interesting enough, he says we repress the sexual desire for our parent of the opposite sex, this Oedipus complex. And that's very powerful. And it's very unsettling for somebody to say that, and thank goodness he's been proven wrong. But he has this therapy of dream analysis, of going under hypnosis to uncover those unconscious drives, which he says are motivating us. Also, kind of unsettling is Darwin. Darwin, of course, provides a theory for evolution, the theory of natural selection, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But it is that traits that are better for survival will progress, whereas those traits that are harmful to survival will die off. And so more and more we're going to have the better traits, and therefore it explains the change of evolution and how we're not falling apart, but actually getting stronger as species. So he publishes The Origin of Species in 1859. And he's very worried about this publication, and it is quite a social upheaval. Then people start applying Darwinism to other aspects of human interaction. Herbert Spencer here is the one that coins the term survival of the fittest, which Darwin did not. But it's applied to economics, that those with better economics will crush those with worse economics. That international politics, countries that are stronger will crush weaker ones. That stronger races will crush weaker races. And of course, all of this disturbs the equilibrium of the previous century with the Enlightenment and the advancement of modernity. And as we see, racism becomes more pronounced. A lot of people think it's a very old concept, but racism is actually fairly new. It's only possible with the idea of different races and change over time that this can come into existence. So it's really some racism in the 18th century, but it's really the 19th century that racism takes off. And it's a major, powerful force. And one of the characteristics is that you have a sequence, a classification of races. So they can look at skulls and say, because you have this skull, you're going to have certain attributes. You're going to be less intelligent, or you're going to be lazy. And so it links qualities to biology, and you can't change your biology, and so therefore you can't change your qualities. And of course, there's always this dynamic where one race is strong and brilliant and beautiful, and the other one is weak, ugly, and stupid. And so racism kind of really takes off in the 19th century and becomes very, very ugly. So when we look at some of these scientific advancements in the 19th century, it points to more anxiety, whether it's in physics, where there's this theory of relativity or limit to our knowledge, or psychology, where it's these sexual drives that are motivating us, or even in biology, when you see that things are linked to how things evolved over time in biology, and it's twisted into this kind of ugly racism. But also, you see this anxiety in the late 19th century in art. Art, for a long time, the beauty of it, the aim of it was beauty. And historically, people thought beauty was an attribute of God. And therefore, to replicate God's creation was the aim of art. But in the modern era, it becomes more about self-expression. You paint something because you express a certain thing and you think it's beautiful. You wear clothes to express it. And so people are always looking not so much to replicate what's in nature, but to create something new, something shocking, something novel. So we see this transition. This is a gross oversimplification. But in the 19th century and previously, there was emphasis on realism, to create something that kind of mirrored reality. And in the 20th century, modern art looks for more creativity, for internal inspiration for artwork. And so we see the rise of modern art. And here's just a couple schools which are originating around this time. In the first two paintings, you see a style of Impressionism. It grows out of realism, but it's a difference. There's usually wider brush strokes that look a little bit blurrier, so that when you stand back, it makes sense. But if you look up close, it's not nearly as detailed. It's kind of got a kind of wider brush stroke that looks like almost a slight smudge. It's not as clear delineations between different things. Fauvism, which is on the right, is more modern, and particularly in rethinking color. So it's got these really bright, wild hues, and it's modern art in the true sense of going away from replicating what they see and kind of more an expression of the artist's desires. Cubism, it's a 3D representation of reality. And again, it's kind of distorted into these geometrical shapes. There's a cubist painting called The Nude Walking Down the Stairs. And one person offered thousands of dollars to anybody who could actually find the nude person. It is hard to really see it sometimes, what exactly is being represented by these cubes. Expressionism, we talked about expressing what the internal person is feeling. And so you see this here in the Scream, that it's all about the emotions, the internal emotions, and being shocking and new, not so much being beautiful. And abstract art, it really is a culmination of modern art. It's really not sure exactly what it is. It's really up to the individual to interpret it. So you see the natural conclusion of this movement away from something that is objective to something that's more subjective. Music, of course, you have classical music in the 17th century, 1700s, and romantic in the 1800s, and now you're getting more modern music. Wagner, this great composer of operas, is seen as a transitional figure, and some people say he's the first modern rock star because of his intense emotions that he provided to his operas. Arnold Schoenberg he invents different tones, and he uses not just major and minor scales, but 12 different tonal systems, introducing new sounds into the musical sphere. So he's breaking ground. Igor Stravinsky composed ballets. A very famous one, which I want to highlight, was The Rites of Spring in 1913. People were dancing weird. The music was all weird. The rhythm was irregular. People were booing, and he's sitting there in his seat as people are booing and saying, it's a success. Because the modern music is meant to elicit some sort of emotional response, not just, I'm sitting there, it's beautiful. It could be anger. It could be confusion, because they thought that's what it represented in the day. That they felt confused, they felt anxiety, and therefore their music was an expression of them. So fin de siècle, turn of the century, end of the century, 1900, Vienna is a hotbed of modernism. You've got modern painters that are introducing the modern art in different styles, like Oskar Koska, Gustav Klimt. And you've got writers like Schnitzler, who's writing plays based on Freud's thoughts, and Hofmannsthal, a famous writer, and you've got Schoenberg, the famous composer, and of course you've got Sigmund Freud, and modern architecture, and all these people are kind of around 19th century in the cafe culture working on that. And interesting that a lot of them are Jewish. They're facing a lot of anti-Semitism, and they're protesting in their artwork against traditional things. The beautiful era in Paris in 19th century, this flowering of a beautiful architecture. Also, you see Picasso comes to Paris, and all Impressionism and Fauvism, and it becomes a beautiful center for modern art and a great flowering of culture. In the 20th century, there's a lot of war and genocide and a lot of anxiety. The 19th century was a lot of confidence and belief in progress. World War I, which we'll talk about next, was the turning point. But these people in science and art kind of prefigure it. They sense the anxiety coming, and then it explodes with World War I. And people in the 20th century, they lost their faith in progress. They believe in relativism. They see chaos around. People don't have the control of society that they thought they had. And this modern world, or really should say postmodern world, reigns supreme. And after World War I, it's not so much Paris and Vienna that are the centers of cultural creativity, but it moves to New York City and Berlin. But first,